Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
Hey, Kat. And then we did only have 2 members that said they weren't going to be joining us today. But we did have a couple Public Assembly Facility Commission members say that they would join as well. And right now it looks like we just have 4 committee members and we need 6 to make a quorum. Hey, Billy Rich.
Hello there.
How are you?
Wonderful.
Hey, Anthony.
Good morning.
Morning.
Kat, we just need 1 more committee member, then we'll have quorum.
Okay.
couple more minutes to see if we get another member to join in, or do you want to go ahead and start with non-voting items?
We could probably go ahead. I mean, most of the items on the agenda are for information. I mean, really the only action item is the approval of the minutes from the February meeting. And I mean, it could always get moved to the next meeting if we ultimately don't have a quorum. So I think we can go ahead and proceed.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order then. We'll skip the first item on the agenda and move to the second one, which is the update on fairgrounds operations.
Kat, did you get the email I sent you with the statement you need to say in the beginning?
Probably. Let me pull it out.
And then Rachel, you'll need to do a roll call vote as
Okay.
well.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that after Kat reads her statement.
Yep, let me just find it real quick. It's from you, Rachel?
Yes, it is. I sent it right before the package
There it
on
is.
Thursday.
Got it. Okay. Call to order. Good morning. Due to the governor's recent order, all members of the Fair Planning Committee are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. At that time, they will be recognized and will be unmuted. When there is a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. A committee member will be recognized and will raise their hand and state their vote. Today's meeting is a public meeting. Per the notice posted on June 4th, 2020, citizens can listen to the meeting if they contacted the city manager's office to make the necessary arrangements. The meeting will also be live streamed on the city's YouTube channel, which can be accessed at www.cityofws.org/2682/video. A recording of today's meeting will be available by Friday, June 12th on the city's website.
All right, I'll go ahead and do our roll call. Rachel Barron.
Here.
Odell Cheek. Not on. Carrie Collins said that she would not be in attendance. Willie Cumbo. Willie?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Sophia Griggs. Doesn't look like she's on. Kathleen Garber.
Here.
Kim Gressley.
Here.
Kim. Okay.
Here.
Joseph Hamby. Doesn't look like he's on. Karen McKee said she would not be coming. And Anthony Tang.
Here.
Thank you. All right, Kat, we can move on to the agenda items.
Okay, so we're gonna table the approval of the minutes for now and move on to the update of fairgrounds operations.
Sure, I'll jump in and take that one. Good morning, everyone. Chair Garber and all our friendly fair committee members here. As you can tell, a lot of us are working from home on the screens. The fairgrounds have been working based on city guidelines from home, I think since middle to end of March. We've had rotating schedules for those that need to come into the office. And as a facility, as a whole, we're closed through July 6th. So we've had no activity from, I think, about March 8th through July 6th. There's been no public activity. We have been a host to emergency management and the state and county warehouse for facilities supplies. So we've been a part of a distribution chain to some of the hospitals and nursing facilities and any other emergency locations within the area. We also worked with Massa City to house some of their masks in one of our buildings. So a couple pieces there, and that's all we've really done. I'll let Cheryl I don't know if it's later in the, yeah, I'm going to pass it to Cheryl and let her kind of go over what we've done in this time to kind of be proactive as far as kind of rebranding and some of the changes we've made about from Dixie Classic Fair to Carolina Classic Fair.
Robert, real quick, I mean, we have reopened the farmer's market. So,
Correct. Yeah. 3 weeks ago, we did reopen the farmers market. We opened outdoors with socially distant and guidelines, along with all vendors and patrons wearing masks. 2 weeks ago, we went indoors, and last week we remained indoors. Still, everyone who enters the building must have a mask on, and vendors are significantly more spread out than in the past. And we've had 3 really good weeks of the market. So we had good media that first week and the second week, and then it's just been a really good market for us and for the vendors the last 3 weeks. So.
Morning, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Like Robert said, we are trying to use our time as wisely as possible on the grounds. Even though most of us aren't there, Smith and Dee, they pretty much and Ben have been our go-to people during this whole process. We're working on buildings, trying to keep the grounds up as much as possible. Right now, we do not have any of our part-time staff back in play yet. So things are moving, but they are moving a little bit slower. We have changed out some of our signage. I think that on the facility branding, y'all were sent some pictures of the improvements. You can see where the cattle barn, those dates and the new logo have been put on that. That looks really good. And you also see a picture of the grandstand. It's in process. It is a dark blue now. And once we get the vinyl and logos up on that, I think it's really going to pop and look really well. Planning wise, do I need to go on into the fair stuff, or how do you want me to handle that? Right now with the fair, we are planning as normal. One of the things we are waiting on is the state of North Carolina to give us some guidelines, especially with entertainment venues, on exactly what we can and cannot do. One of the things that we are doing is keeping up with our IAFE, which is the International Association of Fairs and Expositions. We're constantly in meetings, Zoom meetings with them and other fairs on how they're trying to handle this whole process and trying to get some guidelines on how we can have a fair safely for our customers. With that being said, does anybody have any questions? Right now, there has not been a fair that has opened nationwide. And one thing that we are looking at is some of the other amusement industries, Disney, Universal. I think those have just now started to open, and we'll look at those guidelines. With our carnival operators, with Straits, he is in the same boat as we are pretty much. He hasn't had, he was shut down the first week of when the order was given. They were within 4 hours of opening a fair down in Florida when it was completely shut down. And they are working with Florida government to try to get some guidelines out of them. They've gotten guidelines from Florida, from South Carolina, Georgia. All of their northern route was canceled. So the Erie County, all those up there, it's just been a very challenging situation for us all with this. And once we have more information, we will definitely, excuse me, provide it and try to keep everyone up to date. anyone seen any other information online or?
I've just been kind of looking at that Fairs and Expos website and have
Mhm.
been noticing a number of the closings. It does kind of, like you said, largely seem to be up north and sort of Midwest, which I guess kind of follows the standard calendar of when the fairs happen based on weather. And so I know we're a little bit later being in October, but kind of have we started to see sort of a trend getting closer to October of fairs continuing to be canceled? Or
Well, for North Carolina, I think everyone in North Carolina, I've spoken with people with the state fair, Mountain State Fair. We're all on the same page here. We're waiting to see what the government, the state governor has to say, some of the guidelines that they do put out. And we're all talking amongst ourselves, sharing ideas, trying to figure out, if it's possible, when it's possible. There's just so many variables here. With the IFE, like you said, most of those are out west and up north right now. Our fair season tends to fall later in the fall. And with North Carolina, I have not received any type of guidelines yet from anyone. Now, one thing, mentioning the IFE, if any of y'all are interested, board members, to get member access, if you can just give me some, if you want, I can put your name in and we can get access so you can actually see some of the member access with y'all being board members also. So if any of you are, if you want to be part of that, just let me know and I can add you on. Does anyone else have any questions?
Can you hear me at all?
Yes.
You can. Okay.
Yes.
We've been watching in our office, and I get a lot of emails from people across the country, different fairs that say they're going to open, and then it hits the wire. And for instance, the Indiana State Fair, they were going to hold it, and then they came out last week and said they're canceling it. I know most of the fairs in the West have been canceled. They're not taking any chances because of this conversation about a resurgence of COVID in the fall. So I'm just curious. I've been watching it very closely because of my staff and how public we are to try to protect my staff. But April and I did have a conversation about livestock shows, and some of the fairs or producer groups, organizations are still offering junior shows, but not open shows. And I just wanted to put that on the floor for us to ponder as we get closer. It would be a moot issue to talk about details of something like that, I think, at this point, when you're still not sure if there's going to be a fair. I think that question has to be answered first. I just wanted to say that we would want to have a conversation around large and small stock showing if the fair proceeds.
Yes, definitely. I think that we definitely need to get together with the livestock, and there's a lot, the IFE has provided us with a lot of, where some fairs are holding virtual livestock shows and things like that. And that's something we'll definitely look into to see if that's even a possibility. But like you said, from what I'm seeing with most fairs right now, the call for the cancellation or the no-go is anywhere from a month and a half to 2 months out, which would put us right at August. I hate to keep pushing it off, but I really want it to happen. I mean, we're planning. I'm still sending out contracts. We're still receiving money from vendors, from food vendors. We're getting ready to our book has just, I think it's pretty close to being completing and getting ready to go online. That usually goes online July 1st for our entries. So, I mean, we really want it to happen, and I'm hoping that the powers to be gives us the permission to. And once we get those details, we'll definitely have those conversations with each individual department to see how we can produce some type of show.
And a lot of those, I was just going to say that a lot of those, because I was on the periphery of a couple that happened in Arizona, just by virtue of knowing people and, but most of those animals are, it's a market competition. So it's the plate. So you're talking about auctions that make $1 million an auction. And so they're not able to do that. So they were still wanting to do that virtual show so that those kids could market their animals out to regular buyers. And it's been a challenge for 4-H to help these kids with the costs that they're already into it for, where here there's not a big auction like that. So I think it's more along the lines of letting the kids show off what they've learned and, that skill development piece, but we have to make sure that it's safe.
Correct.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess one of the questions I have is, if it's possible that we would have the fair but have to have reduced attendance, at what point do we get to a point where even if we open the fair, the attendance reduction would be such that we couldn't make money on it? And would that be a factor?
Yes, it would definitely be a factor. We are running scenarios now with our budget and our finance departments to calculate those possibilities to see where expenses and revenues. We just going to have to. We're hoping that we won't get to that point to where we can't have full. I mean, I know that consumer confidence is an issue here also. Even if things do open full force, whether or not people will be comfortable in large in areas with large amounts of people. So yeah, we're definitely looking at all angles of that. I know that I think Steve, he's been running some numbers, and everyone downtown has too. So once we can actually guesstimate what we can do with the guidelines, I think we'll have more information.
Rachel, just FYI on the agenda, we're going to share with you all the third quarter financials for the fair for the current year. And the reason why I've asked Steve Haverlick, our Deputy Budget Director, to join us for this meeting is also to present to you all the proposed budget for next year and to talk about the assumptions that we're using. And we can share with you some more of the number crunching, if you will, that we've done to kind of give you an idea of scenarios that we are looking at. So we have done that, and I think
Thank you.
part of the purpose of the meeting is to give you that information so that we can start a discussion with the Fair Planning Committee about, okay, what do we need to be considering if we look at August 1st as the kind of the go, no-go date? What do we need to be really thinking about in terms of not only the financials, but the logistics of trying to, hold a fair in a social distancing, world, that type of thing.
Yeah, I know we've got also on the agenda the discussion of the criteria to move forward. So I think we can kind of come back to that if we want to go ahead and move to the third quarter financials piece.
Okay. Robert, do you want to do it or you want me to do it?
I'd almost, so off the top, there shouldn't be much that has changed from the second quarter. It's probably identical to the previous statement. And I'll let Cheryl jump in as well. But ultimately, you can see the actual comparison from year to year. In 2020, we were down about $100,000 in revenue there, and $200,000 in revenue. And most of that was driven by a slight decrease in in day-to-day admission. And when I say slight, I mean we were down maybe 1 to 2% day-to-day going into that last Sunday, and then we just got completely washed out Sunday. So really, you look at all the revenues, and it's mainly driven by that last Sunday overall. You look at the expenses; it looks like they're slightly up, and a lot of that has to do with the addition of the metal detectors and additional security for those metal detectors. Cheryl, was there anything else that's up in the expenses?
No, that really is our main reason for the expenses being up. We purchased 16 new metal detectors, and those went over very well during the fair.
Yeah.
It just you need a lot more staff to handle those. So that's where in the contractual services, you see where that line item jumped, and that is where our security line item is.
Sure. So, and then also the city continues to have a minimum wage increase each year, so there's always a little bit of impact in there. There's a minimal piece to that.
Yes.
And then the bottom line there is really that difference of those two items, the washout on Sunday and then the addition of the security leaves that net revenue at 993,707 for this year. So I think overall, like we talked about last quarter, it was a good year overall. No real decreases because of all the fair name change that went on before that. And I think it's strictly weather and security driven.
So this has been, so as you guys can see there, just one final note. I mean, we had budgeted to make about $900,000. And right now we're looking to do, maybe about $100,000 better than that. But yes, I mean, the weather and want to ensure that we have a safe fair. We're definitely the drivers for the 2019 fair. I'm going to turn it over to Steve and let him present to you all the proposed budget. So the city manager presented the proposed budget to the mayor and the council last month, and they've been going through their workshops to review the budget. They're scheduled to approve the budget a week from today on the 15th. And so, but because of the timing here with meeting with you all, we wanted to share this with you, and we'll talk a little bit more about the assumptions that underlie how we develop the budget for, and maybe talk a little bit more about some other scenarios. So, Steve.
All right. Thank you, Ben, and good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Fair Planning Committee. There's about 4 slides for you all, and it's kind of a direct snapshot from what we present to the Public Assemblies Facilities Commission. And so we do combine some of our slides between the fair and the non-fair events, but I will kind of point you to certain columns. This first slide, the table kind of showing the revenues and the expenses for all of Fairgrounds Administration, non-fair events, and the Carolina Classic Fair. And so if you see the column labeled Carolina Classic Fair, you'll see our total revenues proposed for FY 2021, total about $2.3 million. Compared to the current year's budget, this reflects a 25% reduction in operating revenues. Our assumption is if the fair goes on as scheduled due to just behavioral impacts, social distancing, potential hesitancy for potential fair goers to go out to somewhere where there's a big crowd. We just assume that reduction in revenue. There's no real standard percentage. It's kind of just a guesstimate at this point, but 25% is consistent with other event-based revenues that we proposed across the city government for next year's budget. On the expense side, you don't really see much change from year to year. Assuming the fair goes on as planned, our expenses will be kind of as they have been in previous years. There are some additional expenses that I'll let Robert or Cheryl talk about the specifics, but things like extra hand washing stations, hand sanitizers, things of that nature. And so the total proposed expenses are $1,994,230. And so the proposed net income for the Carolina Classic Fair is $346,450. And as Ben just mentioned on the statements, the current year's budget was almost a net income of $900,000. So it is a reduction. There was a question earlier about kind of what's that break-even point, and so I ran some quick numbers, and if we reduce revenues by about 35%, the net income would be basically break-even, and so that's kind of that point that gets you, losing money versus making money.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next slide. So this is just some highlights, kind of in bullet form, and it's for the entire fairgrounds. But if you see the second bullet there under operating revenues, just kind of spelling out that our total decreased revenues for the Carolina Classic Fair, and again, that's just due to current projection that attendance will be down compared to previous years. Again, on the expense side, we assume that Carolina Classic Fair proceeds as scheduled. And so there's no real change, no reduction in expenses. And again, there are some increased expenses to kind of meet some of the guidelines due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The next slide, I believe, is just a snapshot of history of fair attendance, total attendance, as well as paid attendance. And this is since the 2005 fair. So you can see the 2019 numbers dipped slightly versus 2018, and Robert alluded to that, where 2018 was about as perfect as weather as you could get in any fair. And then 2019, that last day of the fair, there was some rain that kind of cut in revenue picture and attendance picture. And then the last slide is just a projection for the overall Winston-Salem Fairgrounds fund reserves. And so you see from FY18 to FY19, there was a slight gain. A lot of that gain is due to the fair and kind of helps subsidize some of the non-fair operations. Then the reduction there for estimates for FY20, and that's really based on no activity at the fairgrounds since about mid to late March. And then there's that reduction for FY21, and that's really driven while we have some reductions in revenues on the non-fair side. The 25% reduction for the Carolina Classic Fair is what drives that decrease. Our FY22 numbers and beyond return our revenues to about what they have been prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. That is it for the slides. I'm happy to answer any questions about the proposed fair budget.
So let me add to Steve's presentation. We have run a scenario, what would be the financial impact if we didn't hold the fair? And based on that, it looks like that we would lose about $670,000 if we did not hold the fair. So it'd be close to $1 million swing in the other direction. As you saw from the reserve slide that Steve just showed, I mean, that was based on 25% reduction assumption with the current budget. So the reserve would pretty well be depleted if we don't have the fair. But again, we wanted to see the numbers, see what it would look like. Steve's giving you the break-even point. I would be interested to see what a 50% reduction would look like. I mean, and then you're just getting into relative amounts of, okay, to what extent are we willing to tolerate losing money? So, but again, to not hold the fair, we're estimating about $670,000 loss in the fair. So, wanted to provide you with that information. I think that here in the next part of the agenda, if we start talking some more about criteria and logistics, that type of thing, I think it's just all something to keep in mind as we try to work towards what we think we'll do. If you know, the governor's orders in the future, you know, will allow for it. So, any questions about any of the numbers? The proposed budget, you know, what we project for a loss if we don't hold the fair, anything or any information that you all need from us, from staff, please let us know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all like the fair and would definitely like to have the fair. But seeing that projection of the fair funds reserves and knowing that we've got kind of that subsidy to go to Bowman Gray, and other facilities, what if we're not able to have the fair this year, is there a possibility that that subsidy could be revisited and find some other way to fund those other facilities other than depleting the fair fund reserve that's already hurting, I guess, if we don't have the fair?
Kathleen, that's certainly a conversation that management would have with the council, to brief them and to let them know kind of what the outlook for the fairgrounds fund is, particularly if we were to, well, really, whether we have the fair or not. I mean, you saw the trajectory, and just really trying to come up with a plan for how we might be able to cover any losses at Bowman Gray, because right now, we're not, we're not racing at Bowman Gray, and I think it's still unknown exactly what's going to happen with football. And we've budgeted for next year based on the fact that there will be no seasons this year, no racing, no football. So we'll see. But you're right. I mean, that means that particular facility is going to look at a loss as well.
I guess that Cheryl, were there any additional updates on the facility branding that you wanted to give?
Other than the few signage changes, I know that we did have if you pull up the one slide from the improvements, the farmer's market mural is complete now. I think it's mostly complete. Ben, I'm not sure about the other side, but they did a really good job on that with the farmer's market.
Meredith, can you pull that up?
Yeah, hold on, let me find it.
Okay.
It was in the initial packet. But other than the logo on the cattle barn and the grandstand, we have had some other signage. Some of our gate signs have been replaced. We do have bids out and contracts out right now for our new entrance, changing over that wording on and design for it. We'll share it as soon as it is finalized. With the rebranding, we're pretty much just going as normal.
Yeah.
Trying to get as much done as we can while the facility is not being used. That does help with painting and not having anyone there.
All right, then I guess.
Yes, there's the pictures of the farmers market. I think those turned out really well.
They look great.
Yeah, I love the colors. Makes it feel a lot more modern.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. All right, I guess let's circle back to the discussion on the criteria to move forward with the 2020 Carolina Classic Fair.
With the criteria, I think that, like Ben stated before, that's going to be mandated by the governor. I mean, we're also looking at people wearing masks, assigned seatings at some of the different attractions. We're looking, I know Lee with the box office is looking at Ticketmaster to see possibilities of, pre-assigned seating, that type of thing. Logistically, I'm not sure how that would all work out. But these are just some of the ideas that we're gathering from some of our meetings with the IFE. Of course, additional hand washing stations. That's a must. Whether or not we're going to enforce everyone wear masks, I guess that will be the government mandate, but there's a lot of factors. One thing we do need to pay attention to is that 80% of our volunteer and staff during the fair falls in that age range of high risk. I've talked to a few of the department heads. Of course, they are concerned. And I mean, they're wanting the fair to happen just like the rest of us, but we do have to take those type of things into consideration. With it will depend on how many people we can have on the grounds at one time. That's just that really sets the entire stage.
Yeah, have you gotten any direction from the state as to when, like, will it be when he announces at the end of June whether or not we're moving into phase 3 that you would get the guidelines? It just feels like when you mentioned that most fairs are canceling 2 months or so in advance, that we're going to be right up on that deadline by the time we figure out what the guidelines actually are.
Yes, we will be. But that's the only guidelines that we can really go by right now. Until they release some type of entertainment facility guidelines like some of the other states have, that will at least give us a push in that direction. I think phase 2, we're in phase 2 right now, so phase 3 is towards the end. That changes daily from what I've seen on the news and other areas, reading articles. I really don't know how to, what direction to even lean towards in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, what we want to try to accomplish with the committee here as a whole is maybe as these phases roll out and as they change and they're so unclear, is really working with you all more regularly than the quarterly meetings or whatever they are, and maybe bumping them to monthly at this point, and then maybe after next month we have every couple weeks or whatever we need to do to make sure we're all on the same page, and you guys are helping kind of guide us with recommendations and thoughts. And you know, like you said, Kat, I mean, what's the point? What's that number where we have the fair, we don't, and then how much can we scale down if we have the fair in expenses? You know, that those overall losses were really an overview, you know, very high level. We didn't really drill down to every little nickel and dime. So
I think we lost Robert. There you go.
so, yeah, sorry. So I mean, there's probably not a lot of savings from that overall budget, but just, you know, as we proceed forward and see what we can and cannot do, I think kind of you all as a group can really help move us where we want to go.
The county has talked about phase 3 coming in about mid-August. It's their guess.
Wow.
That's
Sure. So, I mean, that's part of what we need to talk about when we get together hypothetically next month. So what does phase 3 look like for us? If phase 3 is still around in October, what does phase 4 look like? And then do we start advertising? Is that worth us to start advertising we're having the fair or not? So, I mean, these are some of the things I think we want to work with you all on rather than kind of go at it just as at a staff level.
I thought
that's gonna tell us a lot with those numbers, especially how many people can be in an area depending on that phase, because that will dictate how much revenue is going to come through the gate. So hopefully we can get some type of guesstimation or at least a good estimate, somewhat good estimate. Yeah.
My oldest son works for John Deere, And
Uh-huh.
last night he told me that, and he actually got transferred to Wisconsin, but this is across the board, I guess, with John Deere, that Chad's actually not planning on coming back to work until next year, which is interesting. You know, I mean, you start putting together all these pieces and parts, and it's hard to know what's going to be best here until the governor moves to the next conversation. So it's hard to know.
Correct. And as we get more medical information, I know with a lot of the protests and everything, large gatherings that's been happening over the past week, I think within the next couple of weeks, that's going to give the medical powers to be some good guidelines too on how the virus is being handled. It scares me really with seeing all these people in large areas. They're not doing what this whole
Yeah.
quarantine was meant to do, and that was to stop it. So it's going to be interesting to see what those numbers are in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I don't know, looking at the guidance that has come out as we've moved through the phases, it seems like 50% is kind of the standard operating capacity recommendation for most businesses and facilities. So it seems like that might be a pattern that follows. And if, I think your point earlier, Steve, was that we have a 35%, we kind of break even. But if we're at 50%, like we're for sure losing money on the fair. So.
But that's also, you know, think about if we know what we can run at capacity wise, there's opportunities for us to work through managing expenses and vendors and all those pieces. So I mean, obviously we may never know. It's all going to be a rolling game, but the more we know as we get to October, the more we can control certain items and not invest so much in certain areas, and maybe we can get below that 35% to a 50 or 65%. So I think that's why I think we need to meet more regularly, just to kind of go with the flow that we're going to see.
Yes, just to follow up on Robert's point, all of our assumptions on kind of break-even percentages all assume no reductions in spending. It's full on spending what's budgeted. So kind of timing and how spending could be curtailed could affect what those break-even percentages would end up being.
This is Anthony. It sounds like we are thinking about and being proactive on, okay, this is what it'll look like. I think as much as I mean, honestly, I feel like if we could come up with a plan of, I mean, no matter what the phases say, right, if the fair is open, this is what it'll look like. And try to get a little bit of ahead. Also thinking maybe outside the box. So like just kind of different ideas on if we weren't able to do a full-fledged fair, what could it look like if, I mean, I think about the Dash and the number of things that they're trying to do to get people just get money through the door, right? And so are there things that we could do on a scaled down basis to have a semblance of a fair if we're not able to necessarily do like the whole thing? So as much of that planning and future thinking as possible, I think would be really good.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at all areas there. There's so many moving parts. You have the carnival, you have the vendors, exhibitors, entertainers, and a lot of our vendors, they have not had any revenue generated like normal, like the carnival. You've got to. I can see some vendors, it's actually put them out of business from this being down. I think Carrie has received approximately maybe 10% of the contracts. That's a generous percentage there. on people paying for space rental, and that's just the food and exhibit rental. Then depending on the guidelines on whether or not we have to space these vendors out certain distances to, for the queue lines, people standing in line. You're looking at the annex with there's 120 vendor spaces. If we have to put 10 feet in between those, that's cutting half of that revenue out right off the bat. There's just a lot of factors there. And like I said, we are in constant contact with the carnival, with our vendors. We're trying to keep up with them to see what directions they're going, and even like with sponsorship and other areas also. But yeah, we're open for any suggestions. We can try to create an intimate type fair, but of course that will depend on how many vendors we can bring in, how much the carnival can bring in.
Yeah, and I did see that one fair that canceled was still doing like a fair food day. And so,
yes,
Carrie, you may be able to speak to that. Like, how many of our food vendors are relatively local, and if we could come in for a weekend and just there would obviously be fewer of them than we would normally have at the fair, which should allow for more spacing. But like, is that potentially a feasible option that we just have kind of a giant food truck thing with all the different vendors who could come?
Actually, right now in Raleigh on the weekends, they have been having a drive-through fair food. The way they are handling this, their parking lots, since the governor's order, they cannot have any events either, but this is being held in their parking lot. A certain vendor set all this up to where they rented out the parking lot from the fairgrounds, and they have certain food items. I think the health department gets involved there with whether or not you can have like hot dogs, hamburgers versus the cotton candy apples. There is a, health department regulations there involved. But those have went over pretty well. From talking with Latrice at the state fair, they're getting a lot of people coming through on that. But that is pretty much just a basic rental for them. It does not have any type of food percentages or anything like that involved. So yeah, we can look at that, maybe possibly on the midway, depending on how we're opening. We don't have the parking lots like State Fair does, since Wake owns those, but we can definitely look at that. Carrie, have you heard of anybody else doing it? Is she here?
I haven't heard anything about anybody else doing.
Okay.
Well,
I will mention.
Go ahead, Rachel.
That through all our IAFE calls, we're doing those. I mean, I feel like at least once a week we're on an IAFE call, whether it's a vendor related or just the young professionals or just as a whole, our zone meetings. And we've done a lot of talking about what a hybrid fair looks like. So half the fair online and half of it in person, or just an online fair would look like, and all of these things. So I would definitely, Cheryl mentioned earlier, if anyone's interested in getting a IAFE membership, definitely I would reach out and even go back and listen to those calls or join in some of our next ones, because there's a lot of good information about if we do end up having a virtual fair or even a hybrid fair, how are we still getting our sponsorship money? How are we still trying to make money, but still have our community presence within our community to say, hey, the fair's here, we still care. We want to help our local vendors, help our local livestock, all of those things. And it's been a lot of trying to figure out how that would fit our fair, and just kind of seeing how the guidelines is going from all these other fairs, if they're opening, when they're making their call. I will say on that point that we're kind of lucky that Mountain State Fair is near us and they're a state-run fair. Their dates are actually earlier this year, so their September 11th, I think, is their open date, which means that when they're going to make their decision is going to be earlier than when we would make ours. So I think that's kind of good to see what their guidelines and their procedures are going to be when they make their decision to kind of shadow ours after theirs.
like Rachel said, the Mountain State Fair is run by the state of North Carolina, just like State Fair. Um, us and Cabarrus County is a county-run fair. I don't have their dates right here in front of me, but they're pretty close with us also. So hopefully, depending on what the call is at Mountain State, I can see that flowing right over into the state fair, simply because it's the same people making the decision. So I will forward on any information I receive from both of those and keep y'all updated as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think it would be wise for us if we're able to meet more regularly, like you were recommending, Robert, just so we can kind of be in the conversation. Ben, you may be able to speak to this. I don't know if the fair has ever been canceled or postponed previously, but like, what is the official process for that decision? Does that come from council or?
Well, I think what I would envision, Kathleen, is yes, that management would take a recommendation probably based on the Fair Planning Committee and the Public Assembly Facility Commission's assessment of the situation, looking at everything from the logistics, state guidelines, the financials, all that, and probably put forward a recommendation that we would then, or I would then take to the mayor and the city council for them to probably take the official action. To answer your initial question, I'm not aware of a time when the fair was canceled. But if it probably happened, it probably happened perhaps decades ago. I don't know. But that's kind of how I would envision the process of an event of this scale and this kind of community impact. I think that we would probably look to the two boards, the Fair Planning Committee and the PAFC, to make a recommendation that then, if nothing else, we would inform the council that this is where we're headed.
Thank you. So with that, what are the next steps that we need to take?
Well, you all don't have a quorum to, I guess, officially vote on setting your next meeting, but I think that it would be good to go ahead and for you all as a group to recommend a date and probably in July for you all to receive an update from staff. And then at that point, if we want to get you to formally adopt a monthly schedule, then we can do that. But I think at this point, I think that if you want to agree as a group, hey, let's go ahead and plan to meet, that first Tuesday, or I guess, no, excuse me, the second Monday of July, then we can go ahead and put that on the calendar.
I think that'd be great. July 13th is what it was looking like.
Yep.
Yes.
July 13th. Okay.
Sounds good.
And also, just a quick thought for the parking lot thing. I know, like you said, State Fair has certain parking lots that we don't necessarily have. I think this is a great opportunity also to really just think about possible partnerships and things like that, because obviously from a revenue standpoint, things are going to look totally different from a Wake Forest side too. And so if there are ways in which we can partner with the university to do something like, I mean, that was one of my thoughts. And when I was thinking about outside of the box, if you had all the food vendors in various spots within the Pepsi and Mountain Dew lots and all that kind of thing, what would that look like? So I don't know if those conversations have started already or they will, but I do think that our football season, for example, is going to look totally different than it ever has been. And from a revenue standpoint, that's just going to be very, very interesting. So just continued thoughts there. And I think we'll hopefully know more, like we said, July 13th, and then happy to throw out ideas, because I know those are things that are going on for us on our side of things on what is it going to look like and what are ways in which we can have revenue that we would otherwise not have. And that's going to have to be with new things. We're not going to have the ticket revenue and the concessions and all that like we've had in the past, or at least the abundance of it that we've had. You get what I'm saying?
You just canceled
Yes.
Yeah, I am not publicly saying that. I am not publicly saying that, but I am saying that it is going to be different, obviously. It's the way that
Yes.
it
So I'm sorry, the next meeting will be when again?
July 13th.
That's what I thought you said. So I will be out of state that day. I may be able to connect from Arizona. That's the day my mother has a surgery, so I'm going home for that. But I might be able to hook up with Wi-Fi. I will try.
And you can also phone in on these meetings also, if that wasn't possible.
Okay.
All right. Is there anything else? We can't vote, so.
Nothing for me.
All right. If there's no other business, then meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.